to see you. Thank you for joining us for the Victorian Maintenance Plans session. This is my last event for the year, and Richard and I were just talking about the fact that it seems to have just gone like that, like it's so quick. And I can't even think about the fact that I should be thinking about Christmas presents yet. So please make welcome Richard Eastwood of Smarter Communities, who's joining us today. Thank you, Richard. And also Jaden is also part of the Smarter Communities team, so he's also online for us to actually answer any questions. So just quickly before we start, if you actually hover your mouse down the bottom of the screen, you'll see the chat button. The idea is that if we can keep you on mute, please, just because if we have this many people in the room, so to speak, it kind of like tends to provide some interference to the speakers. So if you could please then write your questions in the chat, then what we'll do is either Quinton, who's also with the Smarter Communities team, or myself will then respond to that question. So either I'll ask Richard or Quinton will actually write you a quick note. We are recording the session, so that's great news. So listen, if you feel like you didn't quite catch something, we'll send the recording out to you so you can replay it at your leisure. So welcome again. I'm pleased to see you all. As of tomorrow will be officially the 1st of December. And of course, that means something to do with the changes to the Strata Act for Victoria. Is that correct, Richard?
Absolutely right. On the 1st of December, we're seeing that we're into a slightly different world.
And we're not talking about COVID.
That's the last thing we want to talk about.
Or Omicron. Oh, this is just going to be a moving feast, isn't it? But anyway, one thing we can bank on is what's actually happening in the strata world, and the fact that we actually are having some changes to our Strata Act, and as a result of it, the maintenance plan. So just quickly before we kind of like proceed with Richard's presentation, just for everybody who might not know about the Australian Apartment Advocacy, we are the voice of the 2.5 million people, or 326,000 apartment buildings within Australia, and we provide education like today's course. We do research, we lobby government, and we also can provide services where we can actually speak to builders or developers or to strata managers or other people in your complex who you might be having some issues with. They call me the Erin Brockovich of apartments, and I'm happy to wear that title. And I'm looking forward to 2022 and what that might bring, because we've started working on our 6-step build quality assurance program. And boy, oh boy, like I always like to give myself one thing a year that's going to challenge me. And I thought to myself with this 6-step quality assurance build program that I would start with fire. I thought fire protection would be pretty easy. And was I wrong? So I'm reading screeds and screeds of Australian standards and then working out what's apartments and what might be storage rooms or schools or aged care. And then I'm working out what the audit needs to ask to make sure that when we actually inspect at the time of installation for our fire services within an apartment, we actually get them all right. So I'm looking forward to how much I'm going to learn over the next 6 months. I'm going to become a guru on construction and apartments. We've launched the Victorian Education Kit, as you might know, in July. We should be launching Queensland's in January, which I'm very excited about, and also then New South Wales shortly after us. And I'm certainly very grateful to the City of Sydney, who gave me a lovely grant so I could actually go ahead and actually do that education kit. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to get Richard to run through his presentation. We've got more people joining us, which is great. So Richard, if you wouldn't mind running through your presentation, and then I'm going to kind of like ask questions as we go, because this is the first time I've seen the presentation. So I'm just as curious as everybody who's actually tuned in. And then we can kind of like get to the end and then do that Q&A, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely no problem, Sam, and thanks for the invitation for us to join you. I think it also goes to, I think, some of the level of interest that the changes have brought about, that we are having this second section. For those who joined us last time, we had, or those who didn't actually, we had a session probably about 6 weeks ago or so.
Correct.
When we were talking about the broader changes, amendments that we're going through. we got such interest in terms of maintenance plans and the implications to do with maintenance plans that we thought it was opportune for us to be able to do this session. I think it's also, you know, where we've got some specialist people that we bring to the table in terms of legislation, legal issues, and I'm glad, as Sam mentioned before, Quinton Thomas working with us. He's got a legal background. He provides us with a lot of legal support for our owners corporations and for us. We've had him for goodness knows 20 years now. So he brings a lot of value to our group. We've also made a change this year to our personnel, and we brought Jaden on board, and I'll throw to Jaden in a moment to introduce himself. But you know, recognising some of the changing nature of strata, we decided that we needed a specialist to work with us to work our way through those issues. So, Jaden, can I just throw across to you just quickly to talk through your history and what your role is with VBCS?
Yeah, of course. I joined VBCS roughly 18 months ago as a part of the repairs and maintenance team, and was approached to join this compliance role. Ideally, I'm here to assist with larger projects at the property, also assist with, you know, the committee itself, the running of the building, just to make the community manager's life a little bit easier and make sure everything's compliant, really.
And you know, Richard, I'm a fan of these maintenance plans, darling, because, you know, the number of times I get phone calls from people and they say my building is 15 years old and you know, I've got cracks in the basement. Can I take action against the builder? And I say, no, you cannot. And computer says no. And the thing is that you should have been doing something from day one, right? So you should be doing an annual inspection. You should be seeing what's going on. And if you see something, as we all know, unfortunately, with VBA and VCAT, if you report something in year 6 and you've got 4 more years up your sleeve, it doesn't mean it always gets resolved in that 4-year period. So the sooner you act, the better, because it's very important if you're looking after that asset, as I call it, and you know I love to call it an asset, that you actually do the right thing and put your business hat on. All right, so I'll hand back to you, Richard. Now I've done my little sermon.
And I'm gonna have a safe word that I'm going to mention to Sam's controlling the presentation. So every time we flick a slide, I'll just mention her name. You are my safe word. What I will do is just before we go there, and I think it's important to recognise that one of the reasons we brought Jaden into our business is the complex nature of what's required, and that is I suppose the changing nature of strata in terms of legislative changes, but also I think some of the intricacies that sit there with defect management. Sam, I know that's close to your heart, and rather than having defect management sitting in with community managers who've got enough to do, we thought it was a good idea for us to be able to take that outside and have some specialist skills that are going to be able to do with that. Sam.
So that's exactly right, Richard. Your strata manager is not the person who should be handling your building management or your defects, right? It's actually a specialist field. You're completely right. Absolutely.
When we're talking about, I suppose, owners corporations, one of the most important things is the funding, and we all know that owners corporations, you know, they need to raise funds in order to do the activities that they need to do. One of which is obviously is just, I suppose, it's day-to-day operational type requirements. They've obviously got to meet their insurance obligations. They also have to, and it's a good idea for them to be setting aside funds, no matter the size of the building, for capital works or maintenance works that are required into the future. We do, and owners corporations each year sit at AGMs and work out what their requirements are for the next 12 months, and it's critically important. That's why we like the involvement of as many owners as we can into their AGMs, so that they're across what's happening with their asset and they're able to make conscious decisions on what happens and not relying on others. So I think there's critically important. The more interest owners take, the better is going to be the outcome as the property ages and as it requires maintenance. Sam. And this is I suppose, the foundation piece of one of the most substantial changes that's come through, and it is a significant advantage for buildings. Prior to, well, even as of today, there was no requirement for an owners corporation to approve a maintenance plan. That comes as a surprise to people. Even when you look at the larger inner city sites, those larger developments, there is a requirement for a plan to be prepared, but there's nothing actually to say that it needs to be implemented. And I think that's one of those changes that really needed to be made, and that's part of what we're doing and what has happened as part of these changes. So I can honestly say in my history, I've tabled a lot of maintenance plans for a lot of larger sites. To be honest, I've never actually got them to approve them because it allowed flexibility. We still want them to fund them, Sam, don't look worried. We still want them to be following them, but we didn't necessarily want them to be actually locked into them. So the subtle change that's coming through is a clear advantage, but it's also about having some flexibility, and we'll talk about that in a little bit of time. So we also know that as part of, I suppose, the current requirements, owners corporations were always able to raise special levies. So they were able to fund works. They just didn't necessarily have to have a plan that they followed. And particularly when we're talking about a prescribed owners corporation, that was a site that was over 100 lots. So there were small, there are a lot of smaller sites that still need to have the maintenance done. They just didn't have to go through any sort of process to be able to get there, Sam.
That's frightening. How do you know what you don't know, right?
Absolutely. And we've seen examples across the world of buildings which are either they don't know what they don't know, and or they don't fund what they do know. So there's a couple of critical parts that sit there. Yeah. So what have they changed? And this is a substantial change. Commencing as of the 1st of December, owners corporations are going to be classified into 5 tiers, and you can see as they're described on the slide itself. What this means is, and what the government have done, and it's sensible, is say, okay, well, let's treat our larger sites different from our blocks of 3s and 4s, so the smaller sites. So what they have done is they broke it down into 5 tiers. They've also said we've got occupiable lots, and I think that's fairly obvious in terminology. We've also got things that are not occupiable, car parks and stuff like that. So they've gone into the definitions, and then they've structured what we're looking to in terms of a maintenance plan into the different tierings. And you can see from, as mentioned down at the bottom of the slide, slides 1 and 2 are required to approve a maintenance plan. So that option that sat there in the past is no longer an option. That's something that they are required to do. Now, what we're talking about in tier 3, 4, 5 is there's still a sizable blocks of apartments. There's still 10 to 50, a block of 50 still, if you're looking at doing maintenance on that site, still has a requirement to undertake a number of tasks. And buildings still should be going through a process of going through and adopting a maintenance plan. At worst, they need to make sure that they're putting aside funds to be able to complete works when they are required. And for those of you that are our clients, we've actually communicated with all of our clients that fit into these categories to make sure to offer them the ability to be able to go through a program and get maintenance plans enacted so that they can then cover themselves off.
And of course, the larger the development, the more chances of, things that need to be dealt with, such as your waterproofing, your lifts and those kinds of things compared to your tier 4 or tier 5. So it just makes sense. The more that you actually have invested in that asset, the more you need to look after it. As I say, you wouldn't drive a car for 20 years without servicing it. So why would you live in an apartment for 20 years without servicing it?
Absolutely right, Sam. So I think it's relatively straightforward, this slide. What does the maintenance plan contain? I think the detail is evident, and I think it's probably important that we make sure that these components fit into an overall structure for what a site is looking at. I think it also goes to the point that Sam was talking about before. We're talking about assets of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. And it's important that we actually know what we're talking about, how we're talking about it. So the legislation goes into some detail about what's included, and you can see that from the slide the type of works that we're actually talking about. And the way that maintenance plans are designed, particularly by engineers or those with the right skill set, is to make sure that they cover off on all of these elements. and potentially can also tailor them to what the requirement is for the local site. So there's some qualification or some I suppose some customization that can happen to make sure that the property is correctly funded. Sam, the next slide goes into the major elements. Currently, when we're talking about a maintenance plan, and some people are surprised, it doesn't necessarily go into tens of items which are included into the maintenance plan. It's very specific about the items that are included. And you can see from here, we're talking about lifts, air conditioning plant, heating plant. We're also talking about any item of a prescribed class. Now, it's a little bit confusing in what it means. What does it say? The government has the opportunity to be able to add things in to the prescribed class as they determine, to be able to make subtle changes to them. They haven't historically done that, but it gives the government the latitude to be able to add in if they think or they feel that something should be added to it. So if you like, it's a bit of a cover-all clause. But if you look at those capital items, they're fairly limited in terms of what is actually required in a maintenance plan.
Well, if you think about a lift, a replacement lift is $190,000 roughly, right? So if you've got 3 or 4 of those in your complex, the last thing you want to be doing is coughing up, you know, $10,000 to $12,000 each. What you really want to be doing is planning for that over the longer term.
Absolutely, absolutely. You can see here some of the items that are requirements, or are certainly I suppose items that need to come in and be factored into any maintenance plan. As we were talking about before, if you've got a block of 10 to 50, you know, a subtle roof, roof replacement on a block of even anything as low as probably 20, you can get up to hundreds of thousands of dollars to be able to achieve what you're looking for. And that's why, you know, one of the most important things is to be aware of your building, the requirements that are necessary, to be able to factor them into your overall cost structure. And you can sort of talk about what we're talking about here. When, you know, our company has got a lot of major inner city apartments, and a lot of the items that might be required for works, you might not necessarily be able to see them. They can be piping that goes between walls, as Sam mentioned before, can be elevators, could be the pipe sewage outlets. All of those sorts of things need to be factored in when we're looking at the overall functioning of a building. It's incredibly important that we know our site, so we know the requirements of that site and what we need to do about making sure that it's properly maintained.
And don't forget, you know, as we move into the future, we're future-proofing. You know, we're going to be removing copper wire and those kinds of things for our internet, and there's going to be a variety of other things that we need to do. You know, EV charging stations and those kinds of things. They all come part of that, right?
And we're seeing a lot of that with, you know, there's the ceramic piping that's still around, the gal piping. Thankfully, we're moving, you know, away from those as history moves through. That sort of stuff is changing. But it's still, you know, to do it there's a huge cost associated with it. Now, this is a slide that we spoke about, well, information anyway, that we spoke about at the last presentation, Sam, and it goes to making sure that you've got the right individuals to be able to complete the plan for you. I've sat in AGMs, I'm sure that Jaden's been involved, where owners corporations will turn around at a committee meeting and say, oh, our chairman used to be a plumber, we'll get him to do it. The amount of conversation that talk about how can we strategize, not necessarily to advance the property, but to save money. And it's always one of those ones where I sort of defer to making sure that you've got the right person doing the right assessment at the right time with the right criteria, because you do need a specialist skill to be able to undertake these investigations and put together these plans. Otherwise, you can find yourself over a period of time where the works required are going to significantly outlay the money you've got associated with them. So really need to make sure, and I encourage owners corporations to invest in their building. We're talking here about maintenance plans. Last session, Sam, we were talking about getting revaluations for insurance and those sorts of things. Really need to make sure that we've got the right people making the right decisions on behalf of our buildings.
Absolutely. And the other thing too that you have to remember is that an architect, an engineer and a building consultant actually have got indemnity insurance, right? And so the thing is that what they give you advice-wise is not right, and you have to then take other actions. At least you're protected. And so consequently, you know, that's also important to remember. You don't want your council or your committee to actually feel responsible that they've given you the wrong advice.
Absolutely right, Sam. There was a question about this came up previously. I was talking about funding and financing. What the question related to is the requirement to be able to make sure you approve your plan, making sure that you've got the right funding to be able to support it. That's why we did this slide, you know, specifically. Maintenance plans, the ones that we engage with, they will give you a breakdown of the works that are required, the timing associated with them, and they will give you guidance on what funding is required on a year-by-year basis to be able to lead towards that plan. We saw before, we're talking about a 10-year plan. Generally speaking, what will happen will be that the expert will say these works are required within these timeframes, and the amount that the owners corporation is required to raise can vary, obviously, as the period flows through, depending on the works that are required. So each year at the AGM, the maintenance plan would be tabled, or should be tabled, is tabled, and then the owners corporation makes a decision on approving that plan and the funding of it. Obviously, at annual general meetings, you also look at how can you fund your admin as well. So generally, you've almost got two budgets, and we'll talk about them in a second. One is going to be how do you do your operational, your admin, and the second is going to be how do you fund your maintenance plan. And generally, most owners corporations have, you know, they tend to raise money quarterly, and I think that's probably the most sensible way of going about doing it.
Correct. And it's all about the fact that you want to plan ahead, because, you know, there's, like, for example, painting, you have about 10 to 15 years of a paint before painting's required on the building. You know, lifts have a lifespan of 15 to 20 years. So it's all about actually, you know, not waiting till year 15 and then saying, oh my goodness, we've got to fork out this money, but actually kind of like it's a planned savings nearly, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's a self-explanatory slide, but it's also critically important. That's going to be, and we have had cases in the past before where the funds that have been set aside for the maintenance plan have been used on other tasks. Now that goes to owners corporations that have not got the correct approved maintenance fund, and they have used the funds for other tasks. The change is that the maintenance fund must be expended for the purposes of the maintenance plan. So you've got your plan, you've tabled it to your AGM, you've funded it appropriately, and you expend for those requirements. So it's very, very straightforward. The next slide, Sam, talks about, okay, what happens when things go wrong or things do need to be varied. And the legislation, the changes do cover that off. Now, when they are covering it off, what they're talking about is you can't just get together at a committee level and decide that you want to use your funds elsewhere. You can't even do it at an AGM without the appropriate number of individuals present or number of voting rights present. So what you can do is by special resolution, you can make changes, you can do different things. So what that obviously means when you're doing a special resolution, it means that the majority, I won't go into the specifics, but the vast majority of owners agree that they're going to be using the funds to be doing something else. And you can see some of the reasons there. The other thing to bear in mind too is that must be reported at the next meeting. It's not something well, as soon as practical, it says after it's been done, but it's something that, you know, we certainly don't want to encourage. And if one of my owners corporations was talking about doing something like this, you'd also be saying, okay, well, you've expended potentially for an urgent need. It's like you still need to make sure that you go back to funding the owners corporation effectively to be able to cater for those works that have been identified as being required in the future.
Correct. And you may also want to look at alternatives such as strata improvement loans and the likes, right? So it doesn't have to always come out of that special levy, does it?
No, there's a number of funding options that are around at the moment. There are a number of finance companies that will invest or will lend money to owners corporations. We have a few of them now, and it's becoming a lot more prevalent these days with cladding, defects, and a lot of those more major tasks where owners corporations don't necessarily. They've got options anyway that weren't necessarily available to them in the past. And they are using them as well. It's a growing market, particularly for the ones where the expenditure can be so high. From a reporting point of view, critically important, and these are musts. And our financial statements at VBCS, we always separate out the maintenance plan from the administrative plan, and there is obviously the legal requirement for them to be separated so that we understand, so that owners get the true picture of what's going on with those maintenance plans, that their income and expenditure is treated completely separately, and importantly that any interest that's earned and is retained into that maintenance fund. Now, what does that mean? That means if some of the larger sites, tier ones, if you're setting aside hundreds of thousands of dollars to undertake some work, you want the fund to be accruing interest in that then goes to funding those works as well. So you're actually getting yourself, if you like, an amendment. You're getting the advantage of any interest that's earned. Although, Sam, interest isn't very high at the moment, so it's not going to be that.
But we actually have done that. We've actually put ours into a short-term kind of like deposit scheme, where then it accrues the interest, because every little bit of money does help, doesn't it, right? And it means that it's everything adds up together. So you might as well do it. If it's sitting there in the bank, you might as well make sure that it actually earns a bit of extra cash. Absolutely
right. Amending the plan, fairly self-evident. I think the most important thing that sits on this slide is probably the second bullet point rather than the first one. And what does that mean? It means that things change, and it means that we saw before about a 10-year maintenance plan. It's a good idea to be reviewing those plans on a regular basis with revaluing properties as they progress. Generally, we like 3 years. This fits into exactly that same category. So you can get, and it's good for buildings to have a relationship with the right contractor to do the maintenance plan. Then you've got the continuity of information. But I think it's very important that the plans are reviewed every 3 years to make sure that that everything is current, that nothing's changed, and that your funding and everything else fits into the requirement of what we're looking for. So important to not only do, but to review.
I totally agree, and especially if you actually are finding that there is a property boom or construction boom, which we are seeing, typically prices do increase. So it is important that you're looking at the costs. You look at the current costs, and then you look at the projected costs, because it's all good and well saying that in today's market we were paid $250,000 to have this project or this work undertaken. What will it actually be in 10 years' time? And that's important to remember.
Absolutely. This is specific to a question that we have been asked. In short, what it says is a maintenance plan follows a building. So you can have owners who have paid into maintenance plans and for a period of time. When that property is sold, the money cannot be removed from the maintenance plan, from the property. So when the property is bought and sold and adjustments are done at settlement and all those things naturally occur, the owner who's selling is not able to go back and say, well, I've contributed, $10,000, $1,000, whatever it is to the maintenance plan. I'd like those funds taken to follow me. The maintenance plan is specifically for the building. It's designated for the building. It's designed for the building, and it stays with the building. So as a purchaser, you need to be aware, or it's a good idea anyway, to be aware when you're looking at at buying a property. When you have a look at the financial statements, you also have a look not only at the admin fund, but also what's the allocation that sits there into the maintenance plan, because that is going to stay with the building. So it's a critical point.
Well, it's also important because if you see that there's a significant maintenance plan required, and Irene's just asked a question about defects, which we'll come back to, you know, then that will also be a precursor to you to be buyer aware that, you know, if you're going to be buying into this building, this is what you're going to be expected to actually, you know, be participating or putting into that maintenance fund too.
Absolutely. We're getting to the end of our slides. What we want to do is probably just do a summary, and I think probably all of us have spoken about the benefits for the owners corporation. I think they're relatively obvious, but I think we wanted to summarize them in the end. And it is coming to the point where I think as more buildings have the requirement to have a maintenance fund, but also understand the requirement to properly fund their building, whether they've got an approved plan or not. And we spoke about just a moment ago about owners being aware when they're buying a property, you know, what's the maintenance of the property, what's the requirement, or how much is sitting in the maintenance plan, to make sure that they're fully aware of what's going on when they're actually are building or buying into a property. And you do find that I have found that from time to time. In the old world, that would be that someone would move into a building, they'd buy into a building, and they'd find that there was a roof replacement required, and there is potential for them to be hit for a substantial bill that they were not necessarily aware of. And I think probably one of the things that we're talking about, pretty much largely, it is certainty of financing. Because that owner that I spoke about that walked into the property found out that there was major requirements of roof replacement or roof works or any sort of structural. If they've spent all their money to buy into the property, and we've all seen what's happening to the property market now, if there's no money set aside, then, you know, there's either a reluctance to do the work from an owner's corporation perspective, and there's not the money to be able to do them. We have to try and scrimp and save to be able to get those funds that are required. And I think you will also see, for those of us under lockdown that have walked the streets of Melbourne, you can see the buildings that are well maintained, properly maintained, where they are, I suppose, presented in such a way that it is a real advantage for a building to have the proper maintenance, the proper infrastructure to be able to make it saleable and livable as well, Sam.
I agree totally. And, you know, the thing is that you're completely right, you know, Richard. I often, as I'm walking around the CBD, I'm always looking up to see if I can see Everest runoff on the balconies, or, you know, even concertina kind of effects on the building. So you definitely do need to be aware. And I do think this actually has taken the next step where anyone who's buying in actually has that level of awareness, which I think is really important. And if a real estate agent says to you there's no maintenance plan, then you have to be worried, right? Because a proactive owners corporation will actually make sure that they deal with that maintenance plan as a priority.
Yeah, absolutely. So timing for implementation. This is where Jaden's role becomes critically important. And you can see for the largest buildings, Tier 1, to be approved by the 30th of November 2022. Generally, our portfolio of properties under VBCS, Tier 1s normally, even though they may not have the maintenance plan approved necessarily, those buildings, we encourage them, almost demand in some respects, that they do have a maintenance plan that accommodates them. So I don't necessarily see that as being such an issue for them. The Tier 2s, so when we're starting to talk a little bit smaller, they've got more time for them to be able to come through. And so as we mentioned before, Tier 3, 4 and 5, no requirement for a maintenance plan, but we're certainly communicating with our owners to suggest that it is a good idea for them to be able to have those, to get the plans and be able to fund them as well. So that's where I think the timelines are there. We do have flexibility in terms of timelines to be able to achieve them. But it's critically important. Number one, that Tier 1 and Tier 2 adhere, but also that Tier 3, 4 and 5 take steps to make sure that they are looking after their buildings and that they do have some plan in place.
Well, tier 3 still have up to 50 apartments in the complex, Richard. That's still a large complex, right? And there's still a number of things that need to be considered in that development. So still they should be thinking about that maintenance plan. I totally agree.
Absolutely. Thank you.
That's the end of the presentation. Now, I've actually got a question here, and Quinton has actually answered it. And she's actually asking about the fact that, you know, if you've got a maintenance plan and then you've also got defects and you're trying to obviously chase the builder to replace the defects, does the maintenance plan take into consideration the defects? Now, my gut instinct, and maybe Jayden will tell me contrary, but my gut instinct is that you would need to think about the actual worst case scenario and actually include the defects in the maintenance plan, just in case that builder does not come through or they phoenix. What do you think, Jayden?
It would need to be reported, definitely. You do want that on there.
Yeah, I think so. And you'd also, that would have an impact on your insurance anyway.
Absolutely, and it's important that the insurance company, either via the broker, via us, is completely aware of what's going on, you know, within the building. And essentially, we have seen this happen a number of times, and it doesn't just relate to what we're talking about here. It can relate to works, and particularly when we're seeing defect works, the need to complete the works whilst taking action at the same time. You can't have uninhabitable apartments whilst seeking a legal recourse. The maintenance plans that we deal with, and the reason why we use the contractors that we use, is there is an ability for the owners corporation, generally via their committee, to meet with a consultant to be able to look holistically at the building and make up or have a funding plan and a maintenance plan that fits in with that site itself. I mean, one of the first things that the consultant is going to do is, you know, look at the financial position of the owners corporation. And they take a holistic approach rather than just looking specifically at, you know, the maintenance plan. It's a whole of building, not just specific to, you know, elements of it.
Yeah. Now, there's an unusual question here. So the question is that we have an unusual tier 1 OC, which does not have a common property or owns asset. It only has an S173 agreement for the maintenance obligation of open space areas, parkland, where all assets and land is fully owned by council and is open for public use publicly. So a community title, I'm assuming there. Maintenance schedule already in place. Is this enough to satisfy the OC Act?
I think there's a lot of numbers, a lot of letters in there, Sam. I think that's probably one where we sort of let Quinton have a review right, and come back. I'd hate to give you an answer and then have it not be what the writer is looking for. So I think we'll defer right to Q on that one, to Quinton.
Okay. Quinton, over to you, darling. I'm sure that you'll type that up. Another question, how do you get a valuation for insurance purposes? Well, you know this, and how detailed does it need to be for a property? It's now required every 5 years for tier 1 to 4, whereas for some tiers it wasn't required on a regular basis.
Correct. So how do you get one? I was going to say at Victoria Body Corporate, but all strata companies at their AGM, they should be, and we do, talk about the insurance that sits over the building. And part of that is going to be, what's the sum insured? The sum insured is the number that is put in place via the insurance company to protect the asset. How does that come about? The owners corporation, particularly for smaller sites, was able to have input into what that number was. We always discouraged that. We always wanted licensed valuers to be involved in that decision and in writing a valuation plan. Why? Because I've been in meetings before. It's a block of 4, and one of the owners will turn around and say, "Well, my place is worth 400. My place is worth 400. It's like it's 16, 1.6." It's like, no, that's not fundamentally correct. And when the building surveyor has a look at it, or the valuer, when they have a look at it, it's a completely different number, because we're talking about replacement value. Correct. We're not talking about market value. Correct. And honestly, in that scenario, we're also talking about guessing. And the last thing you want to do with an asset hundreds of millions, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions, is make assumptions that are not necessarily correct. So it's I think it's a critical thing that we recommend every 3 years, at worst every 5 years, that owners have their property revalued to make sure it's keeping pace with the changing market.
Because the last thing you want to do is have a building that's actually valued at 70 and then the replacement cost is 77 million, because who costs up the other $7 million, Richard?
Absolutely, owners.
Lot owners, that's right. So, you know, I'm a big believer in insurance. I even have insurance for my dog, and I pay that, you know, I pay more insurance for my dog than I do for my car each month. But I'm a big believer in insurance. I think that, you know, if it's going to cost me $7,000 to get him fixed, I'd much rather have insurance. All right, so just quickly here, Janique is obviously very, very attentive, which is awesome. So she's asked, on the slide under expenditure, the wording is that the maintenance fund may be expended for purposes approved. However, the commentary, i.e. what you said, Richard, said it must be approved. So is it a may or a must?
If you don't mind, can I revisit?
Yeah. Let's go back up.
Presumably we're talking about a specific slide.
Yes. So for special
resolution, I understand the question.
Matters not approved by the maintenance plan. So we're basically saying that that it must be. So it may be. Is that maybe? Let's have a look and see. Oh, here.
No, it's not. I think it's the next one, and I think it talked about amending the plan. I don't think it. So that one talks about special resolution for expending and making changes to the plan, or that's the intent. There was, I think it was there was the slide, Sam, where I spoke about the most important point being the second bullet point, not the first one. That was the regular review. The top piece talked about an amendment to the plan being an ordinary resolution.
Yeah.
Not the expenditure, but an amendment to the plan.
Yeah. Yeah. Now we've also had a request, you know, with how do you find a valuer? But a strata company, most strata companies would know valuers, correct, Richard?
Absolutely. We have a number of different valuers that we work with, and we would always recommend a valuer for a building. As I must say, other companies will do exactly the same thing, and there are specialists in this area.
And certainly, if you can't get one from your strata manager, come to me, because I can certainly refer you to one as well. So,
well, Sam, I think that is one of the things too. And as I said, we just communicated with all of our owners about these changes. There's a lot of questions coming through, and they're good questions. More than happy if they want to facilitate them through you to us. We're more than happy to respond.
Yeah, that'd be great. So if you do have any more complicated questions, or something occurs to you at 2 o'clock in the morning, you think, oh, I didn't ask that question, certainly email me and I will pass it on to Richard, because the Smarter Communities team are very prompt. They have been ever since we've been doing these events. So thank you, Richard. Pleasure. So I think that was a great run through. I think that you really did spell out the information quite clearly, which I think is very important. So the tier ones, you've got until this time next year, basically. Tier twos, you've got 2 years, but I don't suggest that you take 2 years, because, you know, the sooner you actually get the maintenance plan done, the sooner you can actually get it implemented, the sooner you can start putting the funds away. It's like, you know, prevention is better than cure, right? And, you know, I don't know about you, but I don't like leaving things to the last minute, because then there's a flurry. And you may see some people actually decide to sell rather than actually do a maintenance fund. I don't know why, because at the end of the day, you want to be able to live in your property and maintain the actual value of your property, and also enjoy the lifestyle that you have with that, without any kind of issues or concerns about safety. All right, we got one more question, please, if we may, Richard. The new amendment 68 brackets 4A says an initial owner must not be appointed manager or vote on any resolution relating to defects. This is not restricted by any majority entitlement requirement or time limit, like with existing obligations of the initial owner in 68 brackets 1. Have I understood correctly? Is this a Quinton response?
We'll let Quentin respond, but I think this is a subject that we sort of covered a little bit last time, Sam, and it was to do with defect management and some of the ability, I think, from the owners corporation to be able to have some protection over developers that were getting involved in their buildings, agreeing to contracts, and also particularly with defect management, potentially looking to impact how those transactions occurred. So I'll let Quentin respond in more specific detail to Frank, but generally speaking, the actual specifics that we spoke about last time was about making sure that owners, when they took over a property, particularly a newly constructed property, had certainty about the contracts that had been agreed and the defect managements that may occur as the property ages.
And that was especially because you do see some developers, unfortunately, stack the voting with the ownership of apartments and the consequent proxies that go with that. And then we obviously did have another option that came up in the last session, Richard, where someone said, well, this person was a developer, they're still living in the complex, but of course they're only one apartment and hence one vote. Yeah. So in that instance, we didn't think that'd be an issue if they were voting. It's more about those developers that own 50% or more of the complex, and then they actually use that power to stop any kind of matters with defects from actually progressing. One more thing I was thinking about, Richard, is that for me, I think it's really important as well that you would have a facilities manager or a building manager. So when you actually start to think about doing things like painting or building or replacing your lifts, that you actually have a specialist come in and write the tender for you. What's your thoughts on that?
I think anytime you're undertaking works at a building, and particularly significant works, and that's one of the reasons why Jaden is working for us within that role, is to facilitate between the owners and the contractors. And we've seen it happen before, where at a meeting you'll say, okay, we'll need to repaint. Let's get 3 quotes. You go out and get 3 quotes, and all of them can be different. How do you get certainty of the works that are required? And then also, how then do you get certainty that the works have been completed to your satisfaction? And that is, a lot of the mediation type work that we can get involved in is about, number one, making sure you've got the right scope. And number two, making sure that those works are completed in terms of that scope and everything, and everything is as it should be. And that is something that it's another one of those issues, Sam, where I've always with my property suggested that they have the right individual being able to perform the right task. And what you're talking about and what we're talking about as a company too is community managers do one task. We're not going to do a scope for painting works in a multi-story building. You need to have the right person doing that. That person can then turn around at the end and monitor the works and sign off on the works. But at the end of the day, you need the right person doing the right task. I think that's. How
do you know what you're getting? Painting a building, especially if there's a 10 to 15-year-old building, you may want to be thinking about putting a water membrane element to it and those kinds of things. And you're right, these are specialists. I was talking before about the fact that I'm starting to write the 6-step quality assurance build program, and I thought I would start with fire protection, and boy, oh boy, did I open a Pandora's box. So the thing is that we are not construction experts unless you're a construction expert. And I may well be by the time I've written the 6 steps, but that's going to be reading about 5,000 pages of Australian standards, with all due respect. And I don't think anybody on this channel wants to do that tonight. So definitely make sure that you actually get a specialist to write the tender, because then you can compare the tenders and you know that you're actually getting apples for apples. And sometimes tenders come in very cheap, and there's a reason why they come in cheap, is because they're actually cutting corners on the quality or in terms of then what's actually going into the maintenance and the repairs. So be mindful of that. Great. Well, thank you, Richard, and thank you, Jaden, and thank you, Quentin. So for me, like I said, this is the last event for 2021, quite frightening really. And of course, the 1st of December tomorrow means we're into Christmas mode. So my next couple of events that are coming up, I've got one in January, which is actually for WA, but I will be looking at doing this in the other states in terms of how to be VCAT ready, if that's a possibility. On the 8th of February, I've got Hazel Easthope from University of New South Wales, who's just finished her most recent research in defects, and so we're doing a bit of a dive into that. And then in March, I'm doing a session about strata improvement loans, which might be timely with the maintenance plans. And, you know, the what, how and why, in terms of why would you maybe take that route over an alternative kind of route. I just want to thank my sponsors who allow me to do what I do. And of course, Smarter Communities are in there as one of my national sponsors. So I'm very grateful for their support. And lastly, but not leastly, I would like to wish you a Merry Christmas, right? It's been a very tumultuous 2021. And Victoria, you know, has been locked in for a lot of it. So let's hope that 2022 is a joyous year. And let's hope that your Christmas and New Year is fun-filled with family and too much beverages and food, and that we can start 2022 optimistically and with our sights set on how we move forward and enjoy strata life. So my contact details in case you'd like to get in touch. And once again, thank you to Richard, Jaden and Quinton, and thank you to all of you for joining in. As Richard said very eloquently at the last time that we did this session, you know, you're the people who actually care about your building. You're the people who are actually invested in making sure that you're aware of what's changing and what's happening. And we appreciate that from you because that makes our lives easier. I just wish I could multiply you by 100,000. And then I would feel like somewhat more satisfied that we were reaching the kind of levels that we need to be reaching with that kind of, you know, I guess, diligence with apartment buildings. So, Merry Christmas, everybody.
Sam, can I say something?
Please, Richard.
I just want to pay tribute to you and the sessions that you've run, and we've been part of some of them. We haven't been part of all of them. And as you say, last time I talked about the group coming together and asking questions. I think it's the way of the future. It's an ability for us to be able to exchange information. I'm not sure how many people we've got attending tonight, but can I encourage anyone who's attending now, if they have sessions that they would like to hear more about, part of our role is about education. Part of what we can do virtually is be able to provide hopefully quick and easy answers to sometimes complex questions. So more than happy to sort of, if we get enough people saying, well, listen, let's talk. That's where this session came from on maintenance plans. Happy to talk on any subject if there's enough groundswell. But to Sam, thank you very much for coordinating these sessions. I think they're a real value for us and for our clients. So thank you.
My pleasure. I love doing this. And we had 150 people registered and 50 people in the room, but I will be recording the session and sending it out to our people who registered so they can actually then watch it at their leisure. So, and I know that with the one that we had with the changes to the Strata Act, we had 500 registered, and then we actually did a second session, and then we had like another 240 people view that video. So that's the whole beauty about these, is that once they're recorded and they're on our channel, people can tune into them at any time, which I think is important. So thank you again, Richard, for your kind words as always. And we will see you in 2022. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.